Today we're going to talk about Iran's history in the oil industry, some current Iranian statistics, and how Iran is improving in their own industry.
The first point that we want to talk about is Iran's early history in the oil industry. This is basically separated into two distinct time periods. The first being their relationship with the United Kingdom and their oil business, and the second being the beginning of their own nationalization. Originally, after a failed concession from an English representative, William Darcy, another United Kingdom representative, came down to find oil, was successful, and under the pressure of the United Kingdom, gave them the company and turned it into the Anglo-Persian Oil Company, later known as the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company at the request of the Shah at the time. Now, the big problem with the Anglo-Persian Oil Company is that it was not on very good terms with Iran, starting after World War One, where the Anglo-Persian Oil Company said that the damages that were assessed were supposed to be paid by Iran themselves after not protecting it from the Germans. And it only got worse from there. From the fact that they were asking so much to pay less than they already were, poor working conditions, among many other things, Iran really did not have a very good opinion of the oil company, which prompted in the 1940s to get rid of it and nationalize their oil, mainly put up by the National Front after a negotiation didn't go the way that most people wanted it to go. Now, eventually, when Dr. Mohammad Mossadegh, the leader of the National Front, became the prime minister, he decided to get rid of it immediately, and they nationalized their own oil. And after he was gotten rid of, after proving to be very dangerous for the rest of the world, the oil nationalization didn't really do much originally for Iran, and it ended up not really helping Iran as much as it did hurt. It didn't really hurt it, but it didn't really help. And in the second part, it'll be explained what happened after the late 1970s, because even though working conditions were still a little sour, especially with the power hungry government that Iran had, it still made money for the company and still an important part of the country today.
Iran has been in the petroleum industry for over a century. Majid Sulaiman, established in 1908, was Iran's very first noteworthy exploration and production well. Ever since Majid Sulaiman was founded, 297 oil and gas reservoirs and 145 hydrocarbon fields have been founded throughout the country of Iran, according to Oil and Gas Intelligence. These hydrocarbon fields are also known to hold multiple pay zones, broken up into a total of 102 oil fields and 43 gas fields, while the oil and gas reservoirs are broken up into 205 oil reservoirs and 92 natural gas reservoirs. All of these numbers come from Iranian engineers who inflate the Iranian oil fleet. There are currently 78 fields that are active and broken up into 16 offshore fields and 62 onshore fields, leaving 67 of the fields not active anymore. The countries Kuwait, Iraq, Qatar, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, Turkmenistan are estimated to have 23 fields that fall along the border areas that are touching Iran. There have been numerous challenges throughout Iran's oil producing history. In 1974, Iranian production peaked at approximately 6 million barrels per day. Ever since this peak, Iran's production has slowly declined. This decline started with the war in Iraq, investors who were limited, United States sanctions, political unrest, and the extremely high rate of natural decline. Iran's oil fields need enhanced oil recovery, which means that techniques need to be used to increase oil production. An example of this technique is used in gas injection. All this does is maintain production, but this method is declining very quickly at annual rates of 10% offshore and 8% onshore. Since Iran's current production technology isn't very good, the country is only extracting about 25% of the oil in place from these fractured reservoirs. This is 10% less than the world averages. Due to damaged oil fields, engineers and scientists estimate that about 700,000 barrels per day of crude oil are lost annually. Compared to the United States consumption of 19 million barrels per day, Iran only uses about 1.6 million barrels per day. Due to the growing population in Iran, domestic consumption is very high. The amount of oil exported is also reduced because Iran's large government subsidizes on gasoline. Having a rough history of refining oil, Iran was once ranked behind the United States as the second largest importer of oil. Government efforts have increased refining and lowered the fuel subsidies in recent years. Once these efforts started to happen, it nearly stopped the importation of oil to Iran. Although the country of Iran still faces many problems, it has been able to accumulate $60 billion in foreign exchange reserves in recent years. Even though Iran's national income has increased, it has not helped specific problems in the economy such as inflation and unemployment.
The Iranian government has been subsidizing food and fuel for its people for decades, but everything changed in December of 2010 when the Iranian president began removing them. Taking away the subsidies has caused a change in the entire economy. Truckers quit working, and the utility sector has been recovering ever since. These cutbacks have reduced the consumption of oil and increased government revenue. Iran is attempting to develop its green energy sector in an effort to help cut back on oil consumption even more. The Iranian president allocated €500 million to green energy projects. These projects have the ability to meet domestic needs and reduce consumption of oil and gas, increasing the amount of oil Iran will be able to export. Iran is the third largest natural gas producer in the world. They have natural gas reserves all throughout the country, estimated at 1,187 trillion cubic feet, second only to Russia. The largest field in Iran is South Pars, which is located in the Persian Gulf. It accounts for 35% of Iran's natural gas production and holds 8% of the total world reserves. Though Iran is trying to export this natural gas, government effort to decrease oil consumption has caused natural gas use to increase tremendously within the country. Iran has also been increasing its refining capacity in order to stop importing of oil. This was triggered by foreign sanctions placed against them, first with the United States, then more countries followed suit. Although Iran will finally refine enough oil to export the gasoline, they will have a hard time finding a buyer due to the trade bloc that the US, UN, and European nations are all participating in. In conclusion, Iran has been an extremely dominant force in the oil industry and will remain there in the foreseeable future. Iran sits on top the second largest reserves in the world, only below Russia, who has the largest. Iran is a member of OPEC and is the fourth largest supplier of oil in the globe, even with the sanctions restricting trade between many countries. Iran has the potential to become a powerhouse in the global oil economy if they can turn around their bad track record, update facilities, and invest in future fields. Thank you.
Throughout this video, we have learned about Iran's history and how they weren't able to get along with the United Kingdom Oil Company. We also learned that Iran currently only uses about 1.6 billion barrels per day through the statistics part. And lastly, if Iran continues to do what they do today, they could potentially become one of the most powerful countries in the oil industry.